Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I am your host, DelSheree Spinner, which is a new name, but it's still the same person. I got married last fall, and the complexities of getting everything changed up, I decided to go ahead and just wait until January to start with my new name on the podcast, and I'm slowly migrating my website and my books and all of that under my married name as well. But anyway, so when you notice that change for our regular listeners, that is why. It is still me, but you will see my new name on everything. And on this week's episode, I am excited to talk to Rick Bass about his new book out from UNM Press, Wrecking Ball, Race, Friendship, God, and Football.
Sure, thank you. My name is Rick Bass. I live up in northwestern Montana, the Yak Valley, right up on the Canadian border. I was born in Fort Worth and grew up in Houston. And then when I was 18, I went to school in the West. I've pretty much been out this way ever since until I, returned to do this project.
And as far as your writing career, you have lots of publications. We'll get into that a little bit later. But tell us a little bit about what Wrecking Ball is, because I think it's kind of an interesting mix of your real life experiences, including some other thoughts. And so, yeah, tell us a little bit about Wrecking Ball.
Sure. My best friend from high school, Kirby Simmons, is a trainer for this semi-pro team in Brenham, Texas. And he was really taken by the story of this team and told me about it. I said, oh, that sounds like you're right. It's a great story. I'll come down there and cover it. And I got an assignment from Texas Monthly to write about the team and the coach. It's a really, hard scrabble league. There aren't many people in the stands, to say the least. The players, in theory, split gate receipts, but there aren't ever enough to even cover the cost of the refs. And the coach of this team, Anthony Barnes, is a really compelling and charismatic figure. And his players, to some degree, some more than others, but many to a strong degree, count on him as kind of a parental figure, a father figure, and moral guiding light. And it was really fascinating to see the passion that Coach Barnes had for a great number of things, including religion and football.
There's definitely a lot of layers to the book, and we'll see how many we actually get to talk about. I always run out of time on all the things that I want to ask about. But first off, I guess where I'd like to start is just the concept of this team. And I don't really follow football anymore. I only have time for one sport, and my first love is baseball, but I do know, the rules and the ins and outs and all of that. But I was really surprised by this league and how it's set up in this semi-pro arena where there didn't seem to be a lot of, I guess, equitable staffing and facilities between the teams. And that was a really interesting part of the story where you describe different teams that they match up against and just like the craziness of having regular training and equipment and facilities and talent and ages. Like it was all over the place. This seems like just the craziest, hardest league to be a part of and not just have it be chaos.
Yeah, no, it's kind of at times a do-it-yourself team. Some teams are really, well endowed, have, corporate sponsors, and other teams, especially in the small towns such as Brenham, don't have access to those resources. And so we kind of had to do it on our own. Coach's wife, Maddie, would have to wash the jerseys after each game, get the blood and grass stains out. And then before the next week's game, they'd lay them out lay the uniforms out on the grass, and we'd all go pick up our suits and get back in uniform. To say it didn't have resources is accurate.
And it seemed like it really created a sense of family amongst the players and the few people there as coaches, because everybody really seemed to have to rely on each other just to get things together enough to be able to show up and play each week. And I loved seeing those relationships develop as you described kind of this course of time where you were involved with the team.
Well, I think that's the single greatest allure of football is it's requisite to be connected to the other 10 players on the field and be connected to everybody on the team, whether they're on the field at that moment or not. they talk about complementary football where the defense and offense and special teams all work in such a way as to do their job, but also set the other parts of the team up for success. And it's really an incredible, I don't know of another sport even remotely like it, where you have such complexity in every breath, every play. You've got 11 players on the field at any one time for each team. So you've got 22 players on the field for every play. The permutations of possibility, it's what, 22 times 21 times 20 times 20 times 19. That's a really big number. And you start adding in the coaches and the players on the sidelines, and no one play is ever exactly like another. No matter, you could play for 40 years and you would never see any one play that's exactly like another one. It's always original. And to succeed, you need to be really connected to the other teammates.
I think an interesting part of that is when you have such a small group, that does kind of create some limitations on what you can do, and trying to keep that complexity when you've only got, one person and no
Mhm.
backups for a particular position, and trying to
Yeah,
navigate with like who you've got and what skills they have.
yeah.
Really seemed to drive a lot of resourcefulness on the side of the coaching to make it work, and make it work with who shows up and what skill sets
Yeah.
they have.
Yeah, no,
Adds a whole other challengingness to it, I guess.
for sure. Our numbers were low to begin with, and then as the season proceeded, injuries would diminish our numbers until players were having to play multiple positions and back each other up. And occasionally they would have to play a position that what you're intimating, they had not even practiced at. Kind of a plug and play, do the best they can and get counsel and coaching on, in real time. Coach, he would draw up plays that would try and protect the players' endurance. Yeah, like, you can be fresh the first quarter and second quarter, but when you don't have backups on the sideline by third and fourth quarter, the other team that can keep substituting fresh players, they're going to pull away over the course of the game. That is very much a part of the strategy that we had to develop as well. But at the end of the day, coach really relied a lot on passion and exhortation to get the most out of the players, and it was just a really amazing thing to watch.
Well, and you go into that with the players and some of the personal lives of the players that interact with the team and the mechanics of trying to keep everything together. And I think that was one of the things that, for me, as the reader, drew me in. But I'm guessing for you as a writer as well, hearing about this coach and how he's trying to manage all of this and kind of be this surrogate father figure for a lot of the younger players, and
Mhm.
just keep this little family that was a little beat up and broken down a lot of the time together and functioning. So yeah, tell me a little bit about how you got to know the coach and just what drew you in to this at first assignment, which developed into the book later.
Yeah, well, I started, following the team, going to the games and getting to know the players and coach. And it was just a really intriguing, passion-driven community or family. And after I did the story for the magazine, I'd kind of been noticing that, the players are really athletic, but they weren't real big. Coach relied a lot on speed with his team. And, obviously the linemen were larger, but the skill positions, not that line isn't a skill position, but it's ball carriers and receivers and such, were pretty average sized. And I thought, I think I could still play with these guys. And I talked to coach about it. He said, sure, come on out there, old man. We'll be happy to have you. So I started, scrimmaging with them and then playing with them. And it was participatory journalism. It was, what George Plimpton did a generation ago. It was just a more intimate way of learning the players and gaining their trust and support, and vice versa, giving mine. It was wonderful. I was the only white player on the team. Almost everyone was black. There were a couple of Hispanic players. It was doubly or even more so an opportunity to gain admittance to a world that otherwise I would not have likely inhabited. So it was a really, once in a lifetime gift and opportunity for me to hang out with them, and then even more so to play with them.
Well, I imagine if you had tried to write the same book just from the sidelines, that would have been infinitely harder, but it also would have been a very different book, I would guess.
Yeah, I think having skin in the game made it a little more intimate and accessible for the reader. I would hope so. Yeah, we can read the sporting pages otherwise, see who plays who, what the score is, who wins. But to be out on the field with the fellows, as they called each other, it was a different perspective. Yeah, again, really, really grateful for that trust and opportunity.
Well, and not that the scores don't matter, but that really didn't seem to be the focus of what you were communicating with the reader. It was much more about the relationships and the toll that it took on the players to keep everything together, and that interdependence of it seemed like sometimes it would get to be a little bit overwhelming because of the injuries and the lack of resources and the lack of people at times. But there was still this underlying theme that you seem to get from the players of like not wanting to disappoint the others and having just this sense of like personal pride and satisfaction of continuing on, even though it was really challenging to stick it out. Just as
Yeah.
a reader, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is so hard on everybody. Why do they keep doing it? But it seemed like they needed to, like all of the players, all the people involved in the team, like there was a drive to keep going, even though it was really hard, both physically and on other levels as well.
Yeah, I think that's again the allure of football. The violence, the 100% injury rate is really tough to reconcile with the sport. But the logic, the elegance and complexity of the games and of the teams battling each other, it's addictive. It's just such a magnificent, beautiful chess match but not all intellectual. I mean, it's also, you have to reach deep into your physical self to do your best to execute the play as it's designed, to endure through the four quarters, do more than endure to stay strong. It's an intoxicating, addictive sport, and it's very hard to leave. We see, most players stay too long just because it's so hard to give up. Certainly this losing season that the Texas Express had, you're mentioning the really hard games. Yeah, it's tough when you're, getting your butt kicked, but the sport itself is still beautiful. And you've always got the next play. Like, yeah, you might have gotten tackled for 5-yard loss or whatever, and things didn't go the way they were drawn up on the playbook, but there's the next play and the next one. For 60 minutes, you get to pursue a thing you love in the only place and way you can do, which is, between the white lines and out on the field.
There's not very many things you could substitute for that, I would think, and still get the same
No.
adrenaline and the way it pushes your body. Like I said, it is a really unique sport in that sense. And yeah, I'm imagining walking away from that and like, okay, now normal
Mhm.
life. Like that's gotta
Yeah.
be such a huge shift, especially like at the professional level where that is like all you do. With this team, this was not a full-time job. Most of the other players had, at least full or part-time work or family
Yeah.
obligations or other things. But
Yeah.
still, yeah, I can see how that would be a really challenging thing to be like, okay, I'm done. And then to not have that outlet, both
Mhm.
physical and mental and emotional too. There's a lot that goes into such a high energy, high contact, intense sport.
Yeah, no, it's not like anything else. That's increasingly rare, of course, in our lives and in the world. I'm waxing rhapsodic about how wonderful it is, but the head injuries are problematic. There's a improvement yet to be gained in that area. It's hard to watch the sport, knowing what we know now about CTE, chronic brain trauma. It's the major flaw with a beautiful and complex sport. The knees and Achilles and bones and joints is not insubstantial, but the brain is the soul, the essence of identity. And to have that being battered and risked across the years is foolhardy by some people's measures, my own among them. I wouldn't want anyone that I loved or cared for playing the sport long term.
It is one of those things that it's hard to wrap your head around in more than one way of like looking at it as an outsider and being like, how could you put your body through that over and over and over again? But I can also put myself in the place of someone who loves the sport and like that is their passion and their release in a lot of ways. Then it's like, well, yeah, I mean, what do you replace that with? So it's not an easy balance to find. The changes in at the professional level and new equipment and concussion protocol and these various things that are trying to make it safer. And I know that there are kind of arguments of like, well, is that taking like the soul out of the sport? Should we just expect shorter careers and things like that? And I think that's one of those it's a big debate we don't really have time to get into in this
Yeah.
and lose the focus from your book. But it is interesting to learn more about that and hear some of the arguments on both sides. Not a lot of easy answers there.
I don't know of a single easy answer for that.
Well, and it brings in something else I wanted to talk about is that on top of the base of the book of chronicling your experiences with the Express and this season that was just really rough, you do bring in other aspects that relate. And you kind of go through a variety of topics and weave those into the day to day kind of chronicling of the story. I was getting a sense of your other writing pursuits, and you do a lot of essays and nonfiction work, and you do have a few novels as well, it looked like. So you've done a lot within writing. How did you blend everything together in this book?
Yeah, I don't think I blended everything together. I do so much environmental advocacy and natural history writing and science writing, and this was more journalistic and portraits and profiles of characters, of the players and the coaches. Yeah, I mean there's woven into the book is portrait of my long friendship with my best friend Kirby and his family. They were my host when I was playing for the Texas Express, and I'll touch on a few other elements of my life throughout the book, but it was most Coach and Kirby.
And I enjoyed getting to see those little glimpses here and there, and
Mhm.
it being worked in where it was appropriate. You do bring in the discussion about CTE and some of the other things going on in the community and with some of the players'
Mhm.
backgrounds to give that extra information that helped readers, I think, who maybe weren't familiar with the area or even the sport, to give them a little
Uh-huh.
bit of background information that I just felt like really filled it out in a nice way that I think if someone came into this book, it was recommended, and they didn't know a lot about the subject, you filled in those gaps really well while telling the character's story. And when I was kind of looking you up and seeing what else you had done and just preparing to chat with you today, I really, I guess, enjoyed the things that I picked up on as I was reading, of this being told not in like just a chronological, and today we did this and today we did that kind of a thing. I enjoyed the structure that you brought in and how you told the story, because this could have taken a few different shapes if you had wanted to do it differently.
Yeah.
And you get to see a lot of different aspects of the
Yeah.
team of this season while still getting to experience the moment by moment parts of it as well. I enjoyed the structure. It was a little bit different than just a purely chronological kind of here's the season that happened. I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you a little bit about, for someone else who might be wanting to do something kind of memoir-ish. When I've worked with other writers, it's always a hard thing to figure out, like where to start, where to end, how to structure memoir, and people take different approaches to it. And with this being kind of memoir, but also topical, how did you approach that? And what advice would you give to someone else who's looking to do something similar?
No, it's a great question. A lot of memoir involves trauma, and trauma narratives are so often written in fragments, kind of kaleidoscopic, which is hard on the reader. I understand why, a writer would use that because, no one wants to re-inhabit trauma, chronologically, which is essentially reliving the wound or the damage. On the other hand, chronology can really be a writer's friend. It's if the story is dramatic enough and has an arc, that is how, I think we evolved as a species to receive stories is chronologically. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end with a realization or resolution, epiphany, whatever you want to call it. And some information has been conveyed over the course of that narrative, that journey. And that's how we communicated before writing was through stories. And that's how we conveyed physical information, emotional information, spiritual information that would help keep us alive, that would help us find food, find shelter. So I think our brains are wired to receive stories with beginnings, middles, and ends. And so unless you've got a really good reason for starting with backstory, chronology is going to be your friend. I think some writers jump into backstory straight away because they want to go to the most exciting part. But if a story's good enough, you can wait to get to the most exciting part when it's time to get to the most exciting part. The beginning should be enough to carry itself as a beginning. I always feel sometimes a writer can be too coy by manipulating time over much in a memoir to, the best stories begin when they begin and they end when they end.
I love that. But I'm not a memoirist myself. I've never attempted that other than, just little flash things in workshops and such. But it's been interesting to work with a few different writers over the last couple of years who have wanted some developmental editing or just some help on structuring. And in your head, like you have so much that all ties back into whatever it is that you're wanting to write about that
Mhm.
it's really easy for it to get jumbled and then to just kind of be
Yeah.
like, well, I'm just going to start at, when I was
Yep.
born and we're going to go from there.
Yeah. Well.
Not an easy genre, I think, to dive into without some guidance and some mentoring and reading a lot of other memoirs to see what worked and
Mhm.
what didn't. It's a tricky one, I think.
Yeah. No. Well, at the end of the day, the writer's charge is to be interesting, and as long as you're interesting, you can get away with a lot of editorial sins.
That is very true. Well, and with this one, I was curious to know if your initial thought about the book, the intention of like what you were going to put together, if that stayed the same over the course of the year that you spent with the team and how your writing happened. Were you writing
Mhm.
kind of journaling as you went? Did you have a structure in mind?
No,
Did you get through
I
it and
was.
then sit down? How did you do this?
Yeah, I wrote it, week by week as it was occurring. So, it was a lot of writing. I mean, I was working when I wasn't practicing or playing. I was writing because there are. It wasn't just a straight chronicling of the games and the scores and the plays. There was, as you're intimating, there were other digressions and associated topics and subjects. It was, and the season was truncated. It was first year of COVID, and so that was an enormous sociological upheaval. And I certainly hadn't thought that would hadn't factored or imagined such a thing when I envisioned the book. But that the truncating of the season allowed me more space and time to write about the friendships, the complexities of the sport, and gulf between haves and have-nots, essentially.
Yeah, I think the social aspects that you brought in, it wasn't something that you like were heavy-handed about and was like, and now we're going to talk about, racial complexities in sports and things like that. I appreciated that when those topics came up, it was very organic and it was part of what you were talking about with the players themselves. And sometimes that was their living situation, getting pulled into the criminal justice system with a story of one young man and just seeing like how these other factors affected their lives as they were happening. And then at those times where you gave some context and a little more background. But I found it really interesting the number of topics that I paused to think about while I was reading. And I always like books that make me think, whether they're fiction, nonfiction, or some experimental thing, which I get occasionally. Uh, but anytime a book like makes me want to stop for a second and just think a little bit more deeply and ask myself some questions and challenge ideas or preconceived notions that I might have, I really appreciate that in writing. And that was something that happened multiple times throughout reading. And I was wondering if that kind of happened to you as you were going through and as you said doing kind of your weekly writing to catch up with what had gone on that week. Were some of these topics things that you kind of went into the situation thinking these would play a part in how I tell the story? Or was it different aspects that just came up as you were writing and interacting and becoming part of this team family that made you as well like think more deeply about some of these topics?
Yeah, it was a lot more the latter. I didn't go in with any preconceptions of themes or issues or elements. I was just living the story, the journey, and so it was very organic. And football is the through line of the book, but the other topics were simply attachments and to that through line that I also experienced and observed. And so yeah, it was just the life the way it was.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love when things develop organically like that. I think for the reader, it really draws you in more when it doesn't feel forced and like, okay, and now we're going to talk about this topic, which I feel relates. So I enjoyed that about the book. And I did want to ask you where we are to the point where we're getting short on time. But I did want to see if you have any upcoming projects that readers could be aware of and keep an eye out for.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I'm writing a novel called White Bark. It's set in Montana. It's about, well, about several things, but the grizzly bear population in Montana is under siege with the Endangered Species Act seeking to be undone, unraveled, and the tree that the female grizzlies rely on more than anything else for survival, the white bark pine, is functionally extinct from climate change. It grows at high elevations. The way it works is it's got a really rich seed. It's like 40% protein. It's like almost pure butter. And the females with cubs can stay up in the high country and prosper up there, while the larger males and more aggressive will be down in the valley bottoms, killing bison or killing elk or killing moose and getting a really high meat diet. But the male grizzlies will kill the females if they come down into that territory. So the white bark creates a social strata, a dietary strata that allows the species to exist. And with white bark going extinct, that's really bad for the grizzly population. The grizzlies are also isolated in these little gardens, 5 subpopulations in Montana. So the story's about a girl in Bozeman, Montana, a young cross-country runner, 16-year-old girl who biology teacher told her that you can go from Yellowstone to Canada and not cross 3 roads. And so she sets out on that journey to do so. And she's planting whitebark seeds in the high country to essentially light a green fuse that grizzlies can follow and move from Yellowstone up toward the Canadian border. And she picks up a kind of a ragamuffin young boy, 10-year-old skateboarder, and has to teach him woods lore and how to get along. And he's from Texas. She doesn't like that fact because so many new folks are moving into the state, which is ironic because the first Americans, experienced that a couple hundred years ago. So here's history repeating itself with this cultural wave of affluence coming into Montana, driven by the television show Yellowstone. And it's fun. And then I'm also doing a lot of work with this Black Ram guitar, this beautiful craft guitar that we made out of a piece of ancient spruce that was fell during an illegal logging operation. And we're using that guitar to advocate for protecting old forests all around the world. These old forests hold immense amounts of carbon and are a really great solution to slowing the rate of climate change. So this guitar is going to festivals, and different musicians around the country are offering to play a song on it to support protecting the guitarist forest. So a lot going on up here. Yeah.
Yeah, well, both of those projects sound really fascinating, so I'll have to keep in touch and learn more. But as we begin to wrap up, I wanted to remind our listeners that the book is called Wrecking Ball: Race, Friendship, God, and Football by Rick Bass. And Rick, where can people find you online and find the book if they would like to go check it out?
I'm at rickbass.net, and the book, you can get it at any of your independent bookstores. Brazos in Houston, the Twig in San Antonio. You guys know where they are, wherever you live. The independent stores should have it, and if they don't, they'll get it for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. Really interesting look at this team and your experience with them, and I look forward to your future projects as well.
Thank you so much for the time and the attention. I enjoyed it.